With that, we're going to move on to our next session. So next up, we have Beyond Boxes, Managing Spaces and Containers in ArchivesSpace. Your presenters today are Tiffany Cole, Kate Morris, and Grace Thomsen from James Madison University. And if whichever one of you is going to be sharing your screen, if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen, please feel free to do that. And while I read your intro, with a 3-year, $95 million library renovation and expansion set to begin in May 2023, requiring a complete collections move in April 2023, James Madison University Special Collections embarked on a year-long project to establish greater intellectual and physical control of its processed collections, as well as unprocessed backlog. Using ArchivesSpace's container and location management modules, a graduate assistant in consultation with special collections staff assigned barcodes to more than 1,800 top containers, created and assigned more than 60 container profiles, merged top containers for boxed with collections, remediated past local practices of locations as top containers, and strategically created and assigned location profiles. In addition to the ArchivesSpace work, this project and impending renovation provided staff the space and incentive to finally deal with those pesky accessions, legacy collections, and orphan materials that every repository has in its custody. As a result, staff selectively reappraised, deaccessioned 97 cubic feet of duplicative and non-archival materials comprising trophies and awards, tchotchkes, newspaper clippings, and out-of-scope records, rehoused unprocessed accessions, and began moving towards an accessioning as processing approach to new acquisitions. That was exhausting just reading. So take it away, Tiffany, Kate, and Grace.
Thank you, Jessica. That was amazing. Yes, exhausting to read, exhausting to do. We're in the middle of it. So I just want to thank ArchivesSpace and Jessica, everyone, for making the virtual member forum a success. We're really excited to be here and to present Beyond Boxes this morning. So we're going to quickly just do introductions of ourselves, a little bit beyond what Jessica said. My name is Tiffany Cole. I'm the archivist at James Madison University Special Collections. Kate and Grace, do y'all want to do introductions?
Sorry, I had a little bit of a technical issue there. I'm Kate Morris, head of special collections. I'm back. I think it should go well from here.
And I'm Grace Thomsen. I'm the graduate assistant at James Madison University.
Excellent. So I'm going to quickly put JMU in context, just so everyone can kind of get a sense of our project. So JMU is, we're located in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, and we have about 22,000 undergraduate and graduate students. So we're a pretty decent sized university. That said, our collections are fairly small compared to many other institutions. We have about 440 manuscript collections and university archive collections. We are a Lyrasis hosted instance, again, just for context, and we also are integrated with Aeon, the workflow request circulation system designed for special collections materials.
Okay, so here's a little background about the project and rationale behind our decision to embark on this work when we did. The project goals that Tiffany will speak about next had long been on our minds as work we knew we wanted to complete, particularly around remedying and updating some of our local practices, but the timing had never been quite right. There is nothing like an impending building renovation to really inspire you to assess your priorities. Carrier Library will begin a 3-year renovation and expansion project in May 2023. During those 3 years, staff offices, our reading room space, and collection storage will be distributed across campus in temporary locations. Planning for the new building and for our temporary offices and service points made us realize that we needed to establish better physical control of our collections and improve workflows around locating and retrieving materials. We knew we wanted to hire a graduate assistant whose work would be devoted to the container management project. We also knew that the project would evolve and anticipated that we would need to reassess project goals as the work progressed and be iterative in our approach to project phases. Tiffany and I began developing the project in earnest in June 2022 and worked throughout that summer on any tasks that we identified as critical to complete prior to the project start. This included cleaning up controlled values for container type and identifying which values had related items that needed top container remediation and instance cleanup. Grace began work as a graduate assistant in Special Collections in August 2022, working 20 hours a week entirely on the container management project.
So as Kate said, we had discrete project goals that we wanted to accomplish, also recognizing that it was highly likely that problems would emerge along the way, as frequently happens when you embark on a project as big as this. So the primary goals were to create and link container profiles and also create an image-based container glossary that is in a Google Doc, so that we had a visual, a representation of what the container profile stood for. We wanted to barcode every single top container. And right now I'm just going to stop and define top container, because for this, as Kate will describe this light bulb moment later, but just to be clear, top containers are the things that circulate. So the things that you present to your patron when they're in your reading room. So typically a top container will be a box, a flat file, maybe a rolled storage container. Those are some examples from our institution. So we had to remedy a legacy practice that was using locations instead of top containers for some of these weird top containers. So just to be clear, and mostly I'm saying this because this was a mistake we made. A map case is not a top container. A shelf is not a top container. A room is not a top container. Just to put that out there. So in addition to barcoding top containers, we wanted to merge top containers for boxed with collections. I know a lot of institutions deal with their small collections differently, but for us, if we have 1, 2, 3 folder collections, we try to box them together, and we try to do it sequentially as much as we can. So we'll hold call numbers for smaller collections. So we try to do that, but so remedying that, we selectively created locations, again, knowing that we would be moving out in just a couple weeks at this point. We didn't want to create locations for every single place in our stack. So we just created them strategically and selectively. And also, as I mentioned, remedying a legacy local practice of using locations as top containers.
And here's where I'm going to talk a little bit about the logistics of the project that I did. So in order to create top containers, we started creating a container profile and a container glossary. So in order to do this, it's fairly simple. You just go to create and then create container profile. And for us, currently, because of the renovation and such, we only filled in the required fields that were necessary. And it's important to note that we did ours in inches. There are a couple of additional fields that you can complete, such as stacking limits and etc., that are helpful when calculating space available, but we didn't use these at this time because our space is about to change. So for standard size archival boxes like letter manuscript or half legal manuscript boxes, we consulted the Hollinger Metal Edge website for the exact dimensions and specifications. But for any additional archival boxes that we have, such as our custom floor flaps that are created in preservation, or our oversized boxes or record storage boxes, we would measure them and then add the dimensions to ArchivesSpace. And then as well, we created a separate document for a container glossary. So this is what our container glossary looks like. It includes pictures, descriptions, and dimensions of the newly added containers. We currently have, as Tiffany mentioned, 67 container profiles. So our container glossary is pretty helpful for quickly identifying which top container we're looking for. You can do this through a quick search or looking at the images, which is helpful for identifying containers for student assistance. And then this is just a quick look here. The images on the left is what the ArchivesSpace glossary looks like versus our created glossary on the right. And then this is just an additional pro tip here. Is to make sure that you name your container profiles how you refer to them in your institution. This not only adds to clarity when looking for the physical item, but it also helps out with your container glossary by having a standard for when new containers are added. And then we did barcoding. So I'm going to talk about the way that we mostly used barcoding, but there are a couple of different methods that you can use to achieve this. So we primarily went through the manage top container section, and then we would search by resource or accession and multi-select all of the boxes in the collection that we wanted to use. And through the bulk operations, we would do a rapid barcode entry. And we did have a handheld scanner, which helped make things a lot faster for this process. So In an effort to clarify collections, locations, and provide additional information to staff and student assistants, barcodes were applied to our collection holdings. Barcodes were provided by our library's metadata team and can be applied through the rapid barcode entry function, which is very ideal when working with larger collections or when you are first starting the process of barcoding your already processed collections. So this was our primary mode of adding barcodes unless we were processing a collection at that time, in which case barcodes were applied individually when creating the resource record by creating a new instance. And this is added when you create the container profile, and our settings would automatically prompt us for a location, which we would use intermittently depending on what collection we were processing and what its location was going to be. And so while we don't use barcodes for locations, ArchivesSpace does have this functionality, and it can be helpful for things like that. And it's important to also note that our barcodes don't show up on the public facing side, but they do print on our Aeon call slips, which Tiffany will show and explain later on. And this is very helpful for students and staff when searching for a collection. Then we're going to talk a little bit about bulk operations. So this kind of feeds into the rapid barcode entry part, but bulk operations allow us to update our container profiles, our locations, and barcodes for multiple containers in our overall collection. So by searching for specific top containers that we need, we either searched by resource or accession and occasionally keyword search, but I'll talk more about that on the next slide. We were then able to select all the containers we needed and update a collection all at once. This was incredibly helpful for some of our larger collections that were processed but needed updated container profiles and barcodes added to them. By selecting all the containers in the collection, you can update the entire collection at one time, pending that you have a good internet collection though. So typically we use this function in small batches for the sake of being able to check our work. And then finally, we're going to talk about merging top containers. So this is going to be under the same settings that you do when you manage top containers. And this is where that keyword search function comes in. We usually would search for box 1. This is typically what we would use when we were doing boxed with collections. And so we would locate our boxes for merging and select all of them. But this is a long process because it required us to scroll through all of our box 1s in our entire repository to find them. And then we would work on bulk operations, click merge top containers, and you select which collection will be our main top container. And for us, we did that in sequential order. So whatever is the first collection that is in that box width group, we would use as the top container. And before this, each collection had its own box 1. So the circulating item, the top container, was unclear for box width collections. To rectify this, we merged boxes with collections in ASpace to allow clarity for our circulating container. This is also helpful when it comes to barcoding with collections because they would all share the same barcode. And it is important to mention here that after you merge your top containers, you do have to go back and delete these unlinked top containers because they are essentially free floating in ArchivesSpace. And they can just like cloud up your space there. So it's easier if you go back and delete them because they're unlinked to any sort of thing.
All right, so now we're going to talk about creating locations. And as I said earlier, we just did select locations, again, knowing that we were moving out to an interim space and then eventually in a few years to a permanent space. So we created locations in ArchivesSpace for oversized, so our flat boxes. For our map cases, we have a few map cases where we house flat files, our vertical files, our media, comics, which is kind of a weird thing, but some of them are described archivally as well as bibliographically, and the point being that they're housed separately in a discrete location and can be, as we discovered, tricky for students to find when they're pulling, as well as rolled storage. So as you can see on the right image, this is just a few examples of some of the locations. So we have oversized. Your range will be the way we consider it. Our range is like a row of shelves. Your column is a column of shelves, and then each shelf is its own location. And then you can see how many top containers are associated with each one of those locations. So the first example, carrier 5B oversized, there are 4 top containers located on that very specific shelf. The left image is just a little more detailed image or detailed description of what each location is. So So I think, if I recall correctly, you have to either assign coordinates or a barcode to your locations. We did coordinates. We don't barcode our locations at this point, but we have the building, which is carrier library, and then the room, which is 5B. Again, I would highly recommend, similar to container profiles, refer to your locations the way you just do during the normal course of your work. We refer to 5B, it's a stacks level in our library, so we call it 5B. So the room is called 5B. We didn't really overthink it much. And then you go from hierarchically, bigger to smaller, column, range, column, and shelf.
Okay, as Tiffany mentioned, one of our local arrangement and description practices that we were eager to update was the practice of using locations as top containers. This issue emerged during a webinar with Valerie Adonisio from Atlas Systems when she described the top container as the thing that circulates. And that was the light bulb moment that Tiffany mentioned earlier. We really had an epiphany about our local practice and what we needed to do to fix it. So we realized that we would need to remediate data in the instance hierarchy to correct this, particularly among our map cases and rolled storage containers. And you're just seeing an image of our map cases there on the screen. So a map case doesn't have to circulate, right? The screenshot that you're seeing here on the screen now shows our previous practice where the top container is a map case, the child is a drawer, and the grandchild is a folder. When corrected, the information within the grandchild field will become the top container, and the map case descriptors will become location information. So here's a corrected instance without children or grandchildren. You can see that the barcoded top container is a flat file, and the location indicates the specific map case and drawer where the flat file is housed. It is important to note that this type of top container remediation is only useful in conjunction with the creation of locations. A top container of flat file 1 without a location would not tell us which map case houses the flat file. And here's the corrected top container. Note that the container type is flat file rather than map case. The flat file is the barcoded item and the thing that is retrieved and served to the patron upon request. The container profile notes the name and dimensions of the top container.
So what we just talked about are all the things we were hoping would happen. So what we anticipated when we first conceived of this project. Grace barcoded nearly 1,900 discrete top containers. As we mentioned, she created 67 container profiles, created 128 locations. I want to mention a couple things here. As far as bulk operations, in addition to create or linking container profiles and rapid barcode entry, you can also bulk create locations and assign locations. And I also want to just highlight the fact that 128 locations is a drop in the bucket to what you can do. And what, if any of you are actively using locations in your repository, you'll know that 128 is hardly anything. As I said, a single shelf is its own location. So if you consider your storage space, all the possible locations you could have. But as I mentioned several times, we just wanted to create a few locations for select material types, mostly in storage locations. And then our Aeon integrations, which I'll talk about next, meant greater findability of top containers for staff and students who were paging materials. So I have here, for those of you that use Aeon, this will likely look familiar. For those of you that don't, you won't know what this means, but we all, I assume, understand the concept of a call slip and what the type of information that it includes. So I have 3 examples of what our Aeon call slips look like now, including top container location barcode information. The first example is you can see that the map case is now part of your location information. You have your collection call number, you have your barcode, but then you also have this directs the person paging the materials that they need to go to 5A, to map case 3, to drawer 6, and then they can find based on barcode and collection number. The second call slip shows you what a boxed width collection call slip will look like. So in this particular instance, I'm requesting the Edna Schaefer retirement letters, which is collection 0061. But if you look at the top section, you'll see that the first collection in that box is SC0051, the Ezra Minnick diary. So whoever's paging will need to seek out collection 51, and also paying attention to the size of the box and the barcode and all that stuff to pull the right box for boxed with materials. And then your last example here just gives another example of a container profile and how it shows up on the call slip. So this one, you have record storage box for box 2 of this collection. Now, I just want to make clear that there is some redundant information on the call slips within the location field, where barcode as well as resource identifier and title might be repeated as part of the location. This isn't something we've been able to address at this point, but hopefully something that we can resolve in the future with a little tweaking.
And then I'm going to talk about the more like serendipitous outcomes that we had. So things that we weren't necessarily planning or expecting for, but were great outcomes nonetheless. So the overall outcome for a project like this was that things came up in the process that required us to pause, reassess, or process a collection in order to move forward. So one example that we've discussed a little bit was our deaccessioning of 97 cubic feet. And this mostly contains scrapbooks of newspaper clippings, Google Alert or various media printouts, and copies of press releases that we did not want to rebox for our move/renovation. Additionally, this occasionally meant that we came across a collection that needed to be processed in order for the instance to be created. So for example, our ESPN game day collection, our poster collection, needed not only item level description, but also item level instances to aid in findability. And so this meant that in some cases, it made more sense for us to go ahead and process a collection as we came upon it, instead of waiting and returning to it. So in this case, creating location profiles in our map case meant this collection had to be processed. Another unexpected outcome for this collection specifically was that it allowed us to reassess the condition of the collection itself. This collection ended up being digitized as well to preserve the posters before they degraded more. And so projects like these meant working closely with Tiffany to assess what steps needed to be taken, whether it was processing, rehousing, accessioning, or deaccessioning before we continued on. And this was just an incredible opportunity for me to learn the ins and outs of ArchivesSpace and archival work in general. And without the help of Tiffany and Kate, I would never have gained so much experience in such a short time frame.
So now I just want to hold space for a second for all of those unprocessed collections that we have, the backlog. So I've got some really scary images here to share with you all. As Grace mentioned, we did have to deal with unprocessed collections, or there was enough time built in, I guess we should say, that we had the space to deal with unprocessed collections, keeping in mind that we had to physically move the collections out of the building, or we will eventually do that. So we decided to rehouse collections. So, we're not proud to say this, but, sometimes when we accession things, we would just leave them in the containers in which they were given to us. So maybe that meant an Amazon box that was falling apart, or a moving box. These boxes on the far left are full of newspaper clippings or PDFs provided by a news service about news happenings about JMU. So we actually ended up deaccessioning those, but these types of boxes where they're unwieldy, they're falling apart. So we decided we're gonna just deal with it and rehouse all of our unprocessed collections. And what Grace did is basically follow the same process as she did for processed collections, assigning top containers at the accession level, barcoding, rehousing, and applying temporary labels so that we could reuse the containers again for subsequent accessions.
Another unexpected outcome of the project was the ability to supply our collections movers with a container inventory spreadsheet. We worked with Lyrasis to query our database to compile data for each unique top container for a given resource. Cell on the screen, you're seeing a screenshot of that spreadsheet, and cells with the red highlight and the barcode column show duplicative content and indicate where there are boxed with collections, which, as we know, are multiple collections or resources housed within a single container. Because top containers are attached to archival objects, the data export originally contained many duplicates where there are multiple archival objects in a given resource that are attached to a single top container. And you can see that the spreadsheet contains data that has been deduped to inventory just those unique top containers. So this will hopefully be really useful for our movers in just a few weeks. Okay, so possible next steps for this project that we expect will continue to evolve include creating locations for our interim storage facility, as well as the renovated and expanded carrier library building, which will facilitate collections retrieval, particularly during the interim period when collection space is limited and containers may need to be shelved according to size. We would also like to consider tracking extent and available space at the location and repository level. And finally, fully integrating into our local practices and accessioning a processing approach that is supported through the act of adding instances to accessions with the goal of making all minimally described collections available and discoverable at the point of accessioning.
So this basically concludes our presentation, but I would be remiss if I didn't shout out some of the resources and folks who have come before us and know a lot more probably about space management that we do, or at least did when we first embarked on this project. Very appropriately, the timing couldn't have been more perfect, but last year's annual member forum, which happened in August of last year, there were one workshop and one presentation that really informed a lot of our work. The first is Space Management and ArchivesSpace workshop led by Nancy Enneking. It's available online. If you have any passing interest in space management or containers or barcodes or anything, I highly recommend it. And at the same forum, Taylor Walford presented on implementing a barcode and scanning inventory system. So that was super helpful for us. And then want to shout out the Bentley's ArchivesSpace container management page. It's part of their processing workflows, and that's available online. I just want to say the 2 annual member forum things are both available on that very first link. So I only have it once, but anyway, I suppose now we have a little bit of time for questions if anyone has anything for us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad that the last member forum, it was like perfect timing, and I'm glad that you brought what you learned and what you've done back to this member forum. That's perfect. Wow. We do have just a couple minutes for questions. There are already 2 questions in the chat. If you have other questions, or in the Q&A, if you have other questions, please drop them in the Q&A, and maybe I'm not sure if Grace, Kate, and Tiffany will have time, but if they'd like to type answers into the chat, that would be good. Dawn says, can you link last year's member forum in the chat? I will try to do that, or if someone else wants to do that, but you can definitely find that from our website and our wiki as well. Lindsay asks, how did you deal with unboxed volumes?
I'll jump in here, and I think we maybe we just had one instance of that, and I can't remember, Grace, if you want to chime in what that looked like, but it may have just been like volume 1 or something. We don't, most of our volumes are in boxes in some way. We really just had one.
I think we only had one, and I think we ended up creating a container profile for that specific volume and then just labeled it as such.
Okay. And there was a question that went away. Oh, there it is. Sorry. How handled custom enclosures? Yes, your point is well taken. Yes, it can spiral out of control quickly. Again, maybe because of the size of our collections, they're fairly manageable. We had, I don't want to say just a handful, but a few custom enclosures. And I think you don't want to split hairs. If there's half an inch here, half an inch there, let's just call it all the same container profile. There's no point in splitting hairs, but we also recognize that it can get out of control quickly.
Yeah, that is a great point, Tiffany, about dealing with slight ambiguities in the measurements is better than having a million container profiles. All right, thank you so much. And that brings us to time, and that does catch us up on the Q&A. Some other questions are popping in the Q&A, but we do need to move on. So maybe if the answers can be typed, that would be great. But we are going to go ahead and move on to our next presentation. So Sarah, if you'd like to go ahead and share your screen. But I do want to say thank you so much to Grace, Kate, and Tiffany for that great presentation.